Welcome to the Diablo podcast. This is your host Flux. My guests on the show this time are Wyatt Cheng and Josh Mosqueira. This is part 2 of episode 100. This is episode 101. Funny how that works. And this show runs about half an hour, and you can hear us talk a lot about, Ironborn mode, Demon Hunter skill fixes for hardcore. There's a bunch of coverage about itemization, including specifics about affixes and such. We argue about PvP, and I tell them why they're wrong. And there are even, and lots more, of course, and lots more. And there are even some cow sounds at the end. Another of my pet peeve issues here, self-found mode, also known as Ironborn, which I think is a much cooler term, and we should all use that instead. You guys have mentioned some interest in maybe supporting it. Obviously, fans are interested, maybe tying that into some kind of a ladder thing in the future. One thing that I haven't heard you guys comment that I and others have been wondering about is most people who've really thought about this, at least in the community, feel like it has to be done sort of as hardcore is, where it's a whole separate economy and ecosystem, ecology, etc. And you can't have Ironborn characters mixing in games with people who use the auction house and would necessarily have 10 times better DPS and such. Is that something you guys have thought about, or do you? I think you mentioned at one point maybe like Ironborn would be like a tag you'd get, but you'd have that until you traded, and then you wouldn't have it anymore.
It is still something that I think is very cool. The whole self-found or Ironborn style of playing. I don't think hardcore is an integral part of that experience, although I do think that...
Yeah, I don't mean you have to be hardcore. I just mean it has to be a separate system from the non-Ironborn.
Oh,
So
yes.
you
You mean like could self-found players and non-self-found players play in the same game next to each other?
And people say that that would not be possible because they would be so different in their quality of gear.
Yes.
And if you were self-found with a friend who was not self-found, you could just tag along and get all the drop bonuses without doing any work.
I think you'd want them segregated.
Yeah. Okay, so that's people just been wondering because you guys haven't mentioned that specifically that I've seen. People were like, are they aware of that they need to be a whole separate thing? And that's a yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now if it doesn't happen, we can blame you both for it personally.
The answer would be yes. We're aware that they would need to be separate. Yeah.
Okay, next topic. Last economy question, basically. Item binding. I think it works pretty well with like the V107 recipes, where if they were tradable, that would be all you would ever see in the auction house for pants and bracers and stuff. And because they're not, it's a nice gold sink, and it removes items from circulation. And one of the reasons the hardcore economy is still a lot more interesting than softcore is because obviously items leave the economy, like the ones on my level 61 Paragon Monk last week. Other than that, not that I'm bitter or anything, but there is a that drains some of the top gear from the economy. Whereas in softcore, it builds up forever, and you kind of get this mega hyperinflation. I'm sure you guys are dealing with that all the time in your plannings. But have you thought about more options for removing gear from the economy? Some sort of, things can only be traded a certain number of times in the auction house, or they lose quality when they're traded, or the other side of the coin is like the Mystic comes back and you can charm or socket an item, and once you do that, it makes it BOA. Are you guys worrying about this kind of thing? And the economy and the item binding is a tool for that?
Yes.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
No, please elaborate.
On the topic of the Mystic, we are looking at methods for a Mystic to modify an item, whether that be adding a property or allowing you to re-roll the stats on a property or replace one property with another, or maybe you like an item except one of the stats rolled low and you just like a shot at getting it higher. We are looking at that, and I lean towards the idea that you would want that item to be soulbound.
Okay, good. We agree. So that's settled then.
Yeah. As a side note, on the topic of anything that having to do with limited trades or reduced functionality. This is a little just like a side design comment is I tend not to be in favor of like soft limits for those types of things. And that's more because I think if you're going to have a limit, you might as well put the limit in there. I think the soft limit basically it still retains all the problems that you had before, while feeling negative to the person who has it. You know, if I can trade an item twice,
And it's confusing on top of that.
yeah,
So
it's a little bit confusing. There's a UI. I feel almost as bad as trading it once, except now I get to do it twice to feel bad. And at the end of the day, you're removing an item from the economy. So I feel like it's not a lot gained over the extremes of either no binding or full binding. And so I figure if you're going to do something like that, just do one or the other. Don't be in this in between land where the player gets to feel bad twice.
yes, well, we wouldn't want feeling bad twice. That's feeling bad and doubling it, and we know how that works out.
Oh, right on the
So
money.
yeah, so I have about 4,000 other questions, trying to skip to a couple of items things. Just sort of briefly, the items 2.0 is the terminology we're hearing. Is that something you guys are actually calling it, or is that just something that the fans have kind of picked up? I mean, are you really thinking of it as like a total relaunch of the itemization system? Is it that
Yeah,
big a
so
deal, or is it just we're doing some changes and people are calling it items 2.0 because that's a handy handle to use?
I think so. What we're doing, and at least the way that we use the term here, or at least the way I use that term here, is Loot 2.0, is not necessarily that we're revamping everything. It's not like how people used to throw Web 2.0 back in the back in those days, but it's
Or BattleNet 2.0, as
uh,
we got recently?
that's true. Um, I think it's just the reaffirmation of our evolved philosophy behind items. The way our item philosophy evolved from launch till now. I think in order for the team to have a sort of simple rallying cry around it, we just started using the term Loot 2.0, and at the heart of that is really well, not just acknowledging, but like loot is a fundamental part of the game. It is, it's what, every time you're clicking the button, the mouse, you're clicking the button, you're killing something because you want something awesome to drop. And just want to make sure that, we're really keeping in mind that core fantasy and making sure that, when items drop, that the players feel that there's a utility to them, that an intrinsic gameplay value associated with them. So I guess Loot 2.0 is a simpler way of us sort of saying that we want to keep evolving our itemization philosophy and really focus it on what it means on the player and making sure that the players feel they're getting cool stuff.
Okay, speaking of cool stuff, you guys have mentioned a lot of changes coming up to legendaries, and everyone's, I think, pretty much positive about wanting that. However, one of the questions we've seen is, a lot of the things you mentioned are like really cool proc effects, like earthquake casting when you leap, or, an item set that gives you unlimited resources, or boots that make you ethereal, that kind of stuff. And some people have pointed out that we kind of got those in an earlier patch, like when, the fire chain demon was added to the Maximus sword, that kind of thing. And those are cool, but they're sort of novelties. I mean, they're not like, I don't think anyone's really basing their build around any of that stuff. So are you guys looking at these improved, double Hydra wand kind of things for the wizard? Are these going to be like, are you thinking these are going to be really game changing? This is what your build will be based around, or are they just kind of cool novelties, or I guess both?
I would love for people to build around these items. I think that if I had a choice between um, option a cool weapon that has, a demon with a fire chain, and option B, a weapon that does way more damage, then players tend to go, oh, well, the demon's cute and all, but I'll take the damage. And I think what we're looking at now is maybe option A should be, a demon with a chain and awesome damage, and option B should be two hydras at once and awesome damage. We don't really want you to be doing a math problem of some amount of damage versus a cool effect, you know, which I feel like is where we are now, which is why a lot of those cool things get relegated to toy status.
Yeah, it's cool when your follower has it, but you're not really going to make a whole lot of changes with it.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
forget
these
one of
should
you
be.
guys. I
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I
I was
was
gonna
just
say they should be cool effects that are also effective.
yeah. Well, that's a pretty good motto right there. There's a whole bunch of questions about specific issues with itemization right now, mainly in terms of affixes. And I'm going to ask a short question at the start, and how you answer that will depend on if any of the other ones are relevant or not. So basically, in the game right now, every class wants the same mods. I mean, you guys have mentioned this before. Everybody wants critical hit and critical damage and IAS and Resol, etc. And are the solutions that you're looking at in Loot 2.0 are you tinkering with this kind of stuff? Are you thinking about things like hard caps on some properties? Are you changing the things? Or are you looking at much bigger overall changes to whole systems and the way attributes function and this kind of thing? And so that, little tinkering stuff that fans are always offering aren't really relevant in the larger scheme of things.
Well, that's pretty case by case. I'd say okay. High level philosophy is we don't like it when one affix is amazing and another one is absolutely terrible, so that I want the good thing and I'm really sad when I get the other one. I think some amount of that is inevitable. People will always, value one versus the other. But I think that the gap between the best and the worst is extremely large right now. So the exact mechanics by which we shrink that gap is TBD. To,
Mm.
but yeah, I do think that gap is too large, and I do think that some of the properties are just not good enough, and they should be better. And an example they get used a lot is thorns. Where we say, hey, we're going to scale it off your primary stat, and then we're going to do a bunch of testing. And if somebody wants to go out there and make thorns build, well, that should be good. That should be a thing. I would love to someday see people walking around with tons of thorns stacked on their character and have that actually be a thing that works.
Yeah, so it doesn't sound like some people are thinking that you're going to like totally redo how attributes works or something, and it won't be of your benefit to get 3,000 dexterity on your monk anymore, or to get 60% critical chance because it's going to be capped or it's going to change how that works, or there's going to be all new mods. So it sounds like at least you're not ready to admit to huge plans for changes, and you're more working on fixing what we currently have.
Well, we want to be careful.
Or should I just ask that again in November and get a different answer?
Well, we do want to be careful with existing gear. That's something we talk about a lot. So if I have a character that works a certain way, I don't want to log in one day and suddenly my character is completely broken. So that's definitely a factor. And on the other side, I regardless of how people feel about existing stats, the idea that there is an item out there that I really want, that I aspire or dream about having someday, is a good thing for the game. So as much as trifecta items or quadfecta items might be bad in terms of being universal for all characters, it would be a different story if they were rare, hard to get, not everyone had one, and I dreamed of getting one someday.
Or even quinfect items, as we're now moving up to.
Right.
So, I guess sort of a related one other question on itemization thing is that a lot of item types now must have a certain mod or else it's essentially useless, like sockets and helms, or critical hit chance on helms, or critical chance on bracers or offhand weapons. And are you guys looking at ways to make it so these items aren't so hit or miss? I guess you just pretty much said yes on that, Wyatt, but I mean, in terms of making those, so is the solution to make the mandatory mods more likely to roll, or to somehow make them less effective on those items so other options are more open to you? Or
Um,
can the mystic be part of this, and she can make those items have that mod, and then they're BOA, that kind of thing?
we've been reluctant to guarantee stats on an item, and the reason is because I think the ultimate end goal is that the designers aren't handcrafting good items. I mean, if we wanted to, we could go in there, we could just make it so that every item rolled nothing but the stats that are the most desirable right now today.
But then that's boring because you all have the same gear very quickly.
Yeah, I think the ideal, which we'll strive towards, and we may never actually get there, but the ideal that we're taking steps towards is that the definition of perfect gear is not the same for all classes. And in fact, it might even be different for people of the same class because they have different builds. One thing I think about a lot is how do we make it so that attack speed might be good for a lot of people, but it's not good for everybody. And that's sort of it's a tough design problem, and we have some ideas, but can we then apply that to everyone? Is there a way so that not everybody wants crit, not everybody wants crit damage?
Not currently, no.
Uh,
But in theory,
right. And I think that is a more a better long term angle for the game than saying, well, everybody wants this, so let's give it to everybody. You know.
yeah. Okay, I would continue on that, but there's a ton of other questions. Single target skills versus AoE skills. I think in um, the interview like 2 days ago, one of you guys, I think it was Wyatt, was talking about this, how Impale is just never worthwhile versus Hungering Arrow, and that's not really fair since one has a high resource cost and one is free
Yeah.
and actually boosts resource.
Right.
Is that just an inherently unfixable problem in Diablo 3, especially since the monster density increases? I mean, we had a whole forum debate about this, and I said, what if there was a skill that would kill any single target instantly with a 3-second cooldown? And most people are like, I wouldn't use it except on Ubers.
Right.
So it
Right.
seems like there's just nothing you can do that's single target that's ever going to be viable in a game where we have 100 enemies on the screen at once.
Um, I think that is a side effect of the monster density increase. Uh, I I think that an unfortunate side effect of the monster density increase is that it does devalue single target skills. What are we going to do about that? Is still up in the air. I think what we've talked about, and I stress sort of like I say talked about with that emphasis because I know that that's not always language that that people like to hear. Oh, they're talking again. Um, but we talk about maybe in a level area there's portions that are dense and portions where single target matters more because we still want to have those moments where we have that heroic 100 monsters, but maybe you don't need to be surrounded by 100 monsters all of the time. And you kind of mentioned, well, maybe I would use it for Ubers. And it's like, well, maybe we can create a gameplay experience that has a lot of variety to it, where during a single 10-minute play session, I have need for both single target skills and AoE skills. And so we're kind of looking at that.
Well, that'll be level 17 in the bottomless dungeon, so we can all plan ahead on that. Okay, let's talk about death and avoiding it. Given that I play hardcore, this is a topic in my head. Monks have near-death experience, which enables them to cheat death. Wizards have unstable anomaly. Witch doctors have spirit vessel. Barbarians don't need anything because they're grotesquely overpowered. Why doesn't the poor demon hunter get one? It's the squishiest class in the game. I love demon hunters in softcore. I don't even bother trying them in hardcore because there's such a razor-thin margin for error. It seems like you could very easily tack on, some kind of spirit vessel type thing. Under 10% hit points demon hunter, you auto cast smokescreen for 2 seconds and it's got a 2-minute cooldown. Just put that in the game right now on Tactical Advantage or Perfectionist or something. Or on Grenade, which has a death effect that no one has ever actually done on purpose. Can that be in there by next week, you think?
Well, there's a lot there.
We're near a weekend.
Yeah. Can it be there by next week? No.
Well, obviously, it's a perfect idea that can't be assailed in any possible way. So my logic is inescapable, as I hear Lyleria laughing in the background.
So I'm going to take your question and much like earlier, use the opportunity to talk about something related but different, if that's okay with you.
That is your skill set.
And and that's sort of like class design in general is I know what players often do, and designers do this too. Honestly, humans do this, is we draw comparisons between the different classes, and we say, well, class A has this, and class B has this, so by logical extension, it is perfectly reasonable for class C to have it as well. And
especially when that's the class that needs it the most.
And I think that it's sort of a line of reasoning that's used to justify a buff to something, to a skill. Another example that I'll throw out there, for example, the Demon Hunter has Vault, the Barbarian has Leap, the Wizard has Teleport. Why doesn't the Witch Doctor get a Teleport? Clearly, the Witch Doctor should have an instant move ability as well. And my general reaction to that is the classes aren't meant to be the same, and I don't want to be in a position where all of our classes become so homogenous that they have different colored versions of the same skills. Um, I think it is good that a class says, "Man, I'm really envious of that other class," and the other classes, are saying, "Man, I'm really envious of that thing that you have. What are you talking about?" And it's good if the classes look at each other and say, "Man, those other guys are super overpowered," and everyone is saying that. Or, better yet, I love my class because I have skill X that nobody else has, or because I can do X and Y together and no one else can do that. So I, I wouldn't make it a change. Let me to wrap up my segue. Um, I wouldn't make a change to a class based on the argument four classes have it, so the fifth should too. uh, I'd be more inclined to say, how can we make each of the classes feel cool and unique? And if the issue is that the demon hunter has hardcore survivability problems, can we address that hardcore survivability problem in a manner that is unique and cool to the demon hunter herself?
I agree with you completely philosophically, but there's like 1% of players in hardcore games in Inferno are demon hunters, and this just seems like a really easy, direct fix that I've benefited
Well,
many
for the
times
record,
from
we
that
do have
skill
the
on my Witch Doctor and Monk.
we have the data on that, and that number is incidentally bigger than 1%. But
You know,
I don't
yeah, I'm
have the
sure
number offhand. But
I was a little hyperbolic on that, but yeah.
right.
But anyway, valid answer. I have one wrap up question for Josh, and we're getting short on time, so make sure we save like a minute for that. But one question on monsters that we've had since the game launched, the purples, whatever they're called, super uniques, whatever the name of them is in Diablo 3. You guys have these really cool names and individual stats, and they have lore, and they have individual appearances, and they're really nifty. And when they appear in the game, they die in 7 seconds and drop 2 stacks of gold and a blue item. It seems like a really underutilized feature, and they're all over the place, and you get achievements for finding them, but you hardly notice it when you do. And it just seems like, is there a way we can fix those? I mean, some huge holistic change would be great, but I mean, in the short term, 5 times the hit points and increase their drops to boss quality would make a big difference just there.
I think the purple monsters are underwhelming in terms of how we got to where we are. Sometimes we had purple monsters because we wanted to put in a cool encounter. So there's a couple purple monsters that are actually cool to fight and strong, and then there's other purple monsters who are put in there for story, thematic, or world building purposes. And so purple monsters were trying to fill two different design goals. And
Hmm.
and internally we've talked about basically saying, doing what kind of you said is, okay, we have all these purple monsters. All the ones that were put in for strictly story and world development purposes are kind of underwhelming. So let's go back and make them kind of interesting to fight, meaty, and give good rewards. So that is on our to-do list.
Okay, cool. I mean, they have cool features, but I mean, so, it'll have frozen or molten or something, and you won't even notice it sometimes because they just get rolled up so quickly compared
And
to bosses.
some of them don't even have an affix on them. And some of them don't. Yeah, and like you said, they don't always have substantial enough hit points for them to live long enough for you to even read their name.
Yeah, just literally last night I was doing Dogger Oasis and I got the Bashiok Fallen Shaman. I'm like, oh, I remember him. I hadn't seen him like since launch day. I mean, in both instances of Bashiok, I hadn't seen him since launch day. But I'm like, oh, it'd be great if he did some really cool stuff, and then he was dead in 5 seconds. But okay, one last thing before I have a couple of postmortems, which we may or may not have time for. PvP. You guys said in a very recent, I think it was just 2 days ago in one of these streams, you're not really working on any current PvP upgrades or systems, though you really, really want to, and people stop by your desk all the time, Josh, and ask you why it's not there.
Right.
And you weren't in the building at this point, Josh, but I mean Wyatt certainly was. And back in BlizzCon 2010 and 2011, you had a PvP demo at BlizzCon, and one year it was a death match, and the next year it was something a little bit different. But I thought it was fantastically fun. I loved it. I love the pre-made systems. If that was on BattleNet right now, I and many people I know would play it every night. And you guys talked repeatedly about how the esports thing was really tough with Diablo 3. Didn't seem like it was any interest in doing that. And I can certainly see that with the existing characters, with there's just such variety and such difference, and how could you possibly balance things and equalize across the quality level of gear? But it seems like you could do an arcade style brawler, like almost like a League of Legends kind of thing or something, where you had all these characters. There's three pre-made wizards, three of each class with the pre-made skills and gear, and people can just choose those and jump into a deathmatch style of mode. And it keeps records, it keeps scores. You've got ladder rankings, you've got skill rankings, you've got matchmaking. That would be spectacular and awesome. And can we see that in the next couple of months?
Well, I mean, I think it's, and you're right. From playing, and I mean, we played that. Well, at least I played that version or those versions when I got here. But I
And
think
they were awesome.
it 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 was, but was it the right expression of PvP for Diablo? And I think one of the things the team really struggled with is, you know, does it feel like Diablo when you're not, when you're not using your character that has all the cool items that you've acquired, and does it feel like Diablo when it's, the fact that you're not getting any items, and so it's again it's I think a really good example of, I think everybody, like, just intrinsically gets the potential of, hey, a PvP mode in Diablo should be a lot of fun, and in some cases, we've seen examples of how in bursts it can be a lot of fun. So the question is, how do we make sure that it feels like, thematically, not just a side product, but part of the overall sort of core fantasy and experience of Diablo.
I think we might get into a debate about the perfect being the enemy of the good in this case, and
That's
the perfect system will be awesome, but if it doesn't happen for 5 years, I
no,
would
no,
love a brawling system in the meantime.
and that is funny because that is actually one of the phrases I love saying is that, the perfect is the enemy of good. And I think part of the, I've only been, you know on the team at this position for, a couple of months, and there's some things we've really been focusing on. But it is our, it's our desire, and Wyatt's as well, that we want to tackle this question. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago came by my office, which what I thought was a really cool proposal. So we are thinking about it, and we are. This is something that, come one day, we will be able to give you guys an answer. Not the
Okay, I guess
perfect, not the
I'll have to
perfect
skip my
answer,
post.
but the right answer.
Okay, I'll have to skip my postmortems. We have like 1 minute to go here. So just the last question for you, Josh,
Yeah,
about the community stuff. Well, I was there at that fan site summit after our lovely little CPK catered lunch,
yeah,
and you were asking us questions, and you only got through one question. You said you said you had a total of eight, I believe.
yes,
And the one you asked us was what? What would your one fix be to make Diablo 3 better, or
yeah,
something like that?
yeah. That
Could
was
you just, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, sorry. Ask. What's the question?
Yes, I wonder if you could tell us what a few of the other questions were.
Oh,
Obviously, we don't have time to go into them, but just what were you wanting to hear, and what were you curious about from the community?
that is awesome. Of course, my brain right now is totally um, not working, but
And your
we sort
and your notepads in your office too.
it,
So
it, it, it totally is. Um, I it's a lot of the questions that we get, that I sort of wanted to sort of turn and sort of ask you guys. Like, obviously, there was a big high level one about what would be the one thing you guys would fix. I mean, the other ones were, obviously the auction house is pretty contentious. That what, if anything, you guys would do to address the auction house. I mean, itemization was another one. Another question I have is, like, how closely should we, as we're thinking about the future, and as we're going forward, is how closely should we stick to the Diablo 2 formula, or how can we keep pushing Diablo 3 into its own space, into its own identity? So those are the ones that are slowly coming back to the top of my head. So I think that was four or five. So there's probably three other ones that are probably a little more noodly, which is why they're not coming to mind right now.
okay, that's good. I have one last very quick question. You guys can no comment in unison if you want to practice. Will we see the Diablo 3 expansion at BlizzCon this year?
BlizzCon is going to be awesome this year.
That wasn't in unison though.
Oh, sorry. Oh, ready?
Okay, guys. Well, thanks a lot for your time.
Cool.
Thank
One
you. It was nice
one thing we
talking
always
to
do
you.
it one thing we always do at the end of the podcast is I say this: Welcome to Diablo. Thanks for listening to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diabloincgamers.com. Moo. And we all do our secret cow level sound effects. Can you guys join me in a moo?
Sure.
Sure.
Moo.
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 Okay, guys, thanks a
All
lot.
right, thanks.
See ya.
Thanks, Eric.
Bye bye.